All right, so I'm here with SHiFT. He's a Battle for Bikini Bottom speedrunner. Um, SHiFT, I want to first of all ask you something about the game that you play.
Sure.
Battle for Bikini Bottom. It seems like an unconventional game to speedrun. Uh, is there any, at least from an outside perspective, is there any sort of stigma attached or any sense of like maybe unique struggles or difficulties that come with speedrunning that game in particular, or maybe the community of that game?
In the past, I definitely say yes because 4 years ago when I started running, it was more obscure and there was much more of a stigma attached to it, like you said. But over the years, I think people have become more accepting of it, and it's built its own community in the case where, like, well, at least now we have, like, I don't know if you're too familiar with like statistics on speedrun.com, but it's consistently one of the most active speedruns, and it also has over 500 people on the leaderboard now. So it's become a lot less obscure. It's become one of the more popular games. So with that, I think people are a little bit less willing to criticize it or throw stones at it publicly, at least. At least now, I can't tell you whether the stigma exists still because people probably wouldn't tell me personally. Because, like if you say most of the time, if you criticize something for the sake of just like, oh, it's SpongeBob, it's a meme because it's SpongeBob. Like that's going to get met with a lot of backlash now because a lot of people play the game. So it's not as much as an easy target now, is what I'm saying. But I'm not sure if whether the stigma still exists in a widespread or not, because I personally, they wouldn't be gossiping about it in front of me. So with that, I would say that it used to be a lot more, stigmatized, made fun of. But in the present day, like I said, it has more of its own community now. It's gotten to the point where I guess you call it the revival of the game has gotten so widespread that the publisher that released the game 15 or 16 years ago is actually um, commissioning a full blown remake from a studio called Purple Lamp Studios. They're making a full blown remake from the ground up on a new engine that's going to be released this year. So that all people most of the time say that like the movement that like we started with this game is what encouraged this to eventually happen, that they realized there was so much interest in the game that they wanted to make a new SpongeBob game. It would make sense to make the one that's the most relevant or the most popular. So yeah, definitely the whole like it's unconventional thing definitely was in the past, but in the current day I think it's one of the more accepted and popular speedruns, I'd say.
And so I guess you've played a large role in that yourself, though, because you're kind of one of the earlier pioneers of this game and of this community, right?
During its phase when it was kind of exploding and getting more popular, I definitely was. The game's actually been speedrun since 2010 technically, but the original, and again, like this will all be covered in a video that's being made for like the history of the game. That's gonna probably drop sometime this year, maybe next year. Um, the history of this game sort of truly begins in like late 2012 when some of the runners, Hazel, she's a pretty well-known tasser of like SA2B, Super Mario Sunshine sometimes, Battle for Bikini Bottom. Metroid Prime is her big one that you've maybe seen the Metroid Prime task. She's done all that stuff. So she is a very well-renowned tasser, along with in the past there was this guy Cole Udd who used to do a lot of glitch hunting, and like he did like a bunch of runs of like SpongeBob games, and this was one of the games that he ran. So it was like pretty low key and more of like for fun side project stuff. So it started way back in 2012, but I discovered the game in 2016 when it was already, like most of the people who were playing had already stopped. And there was this guy, Fuff, who has also held world records in A Hat in Time. You've probably heard of that game. It was pretty popular a couple of years ago. So he eventually went on to run that game. But before he did that, he was actually playing Battle for Bikini Bottom with me. And we traded off records a couple of times, and that was like the whole like 2016 arc, like the first half of the year when the game started to gain traction again. It was like that was when I stepped in. We were both like competing for world record, and eventually, when he stopped playing, shortly after the game got into GDQ, and from there it got a lot more attention. More people started running the game because we started building more resources. With the more resources and people playing, more tricks are being found because they were, more passionate, smarter people coming into the game, coming back to the game as well, who are finding more stuff to make the game faster, and that just made the game more entertaining, more enticing for people to play it. And so that just kind of just snowballed into what it is now, where it's, like I said, it's one of the more popular games in speedrunning at the moment.
Well, that's awesome to hear. That you've kind of been a part of that movement, that grassroots movement, to bring a game into the forefront a bit, and even get the developers to try to work on another game. Like that's pretty awesome. Now, the irony here is that I know that you and I wouldn't want to be defined by, this incident, the one you talked about in your video, the one that was kind of perpetrated by people who were already out to get you, by this guy who was a doxer, who was sort of a harasser, a bully of sorts, a troll, that had been out to get you and others. Well, first of all, is that a pretty good summation of where things began with you getting banned?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was more so a group of people who had some kind of like deep-seated resentment of me and others in the community, or because they had nothing better to do. That's also a good idea of what could have happened. But I mean, ultimately, it's all anonymous, and I'm not gonna, in case I'm wrong, I'm not gonna call specific people out who may or may not have been involved, even though we pretty much know who it was, just to keep things clean. I don't want to reopen that kind
Right.
of stuff and give people more attention than they deserve. But that's a pretty good summation of what occurred. Um,
And to that point,
yeah,
though, as I was getting to, I don't want to define you by that, and I know that you don't want to define yourself by. I mean, certainly not that, and definitely not the clip that they reported you for. By the way, full disclosure, I was also banned on Twitch for use of the same word, so I'm not in such a different position than you.
right.
But in the video, I mean, and based on your past actions, you're someone who is not only willing to change, is not only, addressing that, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe I could have done better, but you've actually like taken real steps and actually proven it with your actions that doesn't define you at all. That's not even a good representation of you. And it's certainly not a good representation of you now. And I would never think that it is, by the way, just based off you or anyone saying it like that offhand.
Right.
But I guess for me, the really crucial part of this situation is, what does it say about games done quick when someone like you, who has apologized, has changed, and has done basically everything they can, right, to, I guess, compensate for or overcome, just saying something like that in a clip? What does it say when they go forward with the punishment, when they ban you? I mean, you seem like almost a product of this cancel culture, this no, never forgive, always punish mentality. Is that how you feel?
I think in some cases that may be true, but for my specific case, just since I've had a lot of time to think about it and I've seen other incidents happen since then, I don't think it's necessarily a product of like cancel culture or necessarily even people trying to be like going out to get me. Um, it is possible that there are people who run the event that dislike me as a person or like as they view me on my stream or publicly. Like that's fine, whatever. But I think this is more of an instance of like a hair trigger where uh, somebody saw the clip, didn't look into the context of it, when it was said, how it was said. Like if people were even outraged over this because like in most looking at the most recent cases of these bans that have happened at Games Done Quick, a lot of it starts with people getting called out or exposed by people on Twitter, like a group of people on Twitter see something they don't like and then they just harass Games Done Quick to ban them, and if they don't respond to it, they, I guess to them, their company images that they're condoning it or they're turning a blind eye to it, which I guess is not part of their brand. Like they want to be the people, like the protectors of the people who are typically marginalized like this, right? So they don't want to pretend like it's not happening, so in that case they'll just do something about it. But in my case, it was especially unique because nobody was really asking for this. Nobody really mentioned this or really cared about it publicly. Like when it happened, people were just like, I mean, okay, he's a dumbass for saying the word. You know, obviously you shouldn't use that word if you don't feel that way about those people. Even though like there's more than one definition, it can be taken as the other one, and you know, like just learn how to use the English language sort of thing. Like that's pretty much the reaction that I got when it first happened. But you know, a year later, people I had totally forgotten about this happening. Honestly, like pretty much the only thing like I mean, obviously I remember that it happened, but like you know what I'm saying. Like the ban I'd moved past it is what I meant to say as a figure of speech that I forgot about it. Like obviously I didn't, but you know what I'm saying. Okay. So um so when this broke that I got banned for saying this a year ago or a year from then, it's obviously been a lot longer now. Um it was met with a lot of outrage from like 99% of people because I mean obviously speaking from like just like Twitter statistics like likes and replies and stuff like there were like maybe one or two people who said like yeah fuck this guy he used that word once whatever but obviously there are going to be people who disagree with you no matter what so it's not worth you know getting upset over it or feeling worse about yourself over it. The general consensus is that most people didn't really care and like how I feel about that, really, I feel like people should care that I said it because, like, obviously, I don't need the motivation from other people to change myself because I'm always constantly reflecting on myself and trying to make myself better. But I think in some cases, like, if it were somebody else, like, if everybody said, I don't care, you know, like, how would somebody else have reacted to it, you know? Because would somebody else just said, yeah, they're all wrong. GDQ is 100% in the wrong here. Like, I don't think that's the case. Like I'm definitely in the wrong for saying it. Like you can't just take that away. So I think that both sides like have like neither side is 100% in the right, you know? Like there are the people who are saying that it doesn't matter at all. Not so correct, but Games Done Quick for banning me on a like a hair trigger for saying it once and like out of context and not looking into who reported it or why they reported it. Also not so great either. And I'm not alone on this either. I have friends who you know support Games Done Quick who still believe that they didn't do the right thing. I have friends who don't support Games Done Quick who say that you know like yeah you still shouldn't have said the word. You know it's like there's definitely a middle ground here is what I'm trying to say. You know.
Uh,
Um,
I want to
but
speak
yeah.
to the climate surrounding Games Done Quick and how they do their bans that you were kind of alluding to earlier, which is they're sort of trying to be these protectors of marginalized people or marginalized groups. And I think that comes off as initially like very well meaning, well intending, and a good thing, even. But what I feel like I'm noticing is that a lot of the times when you do that, or at least in this setting, this online sphere, it's very you're basically catering to very reactionary people, and the more ground you give, the more ground they're going to expect. So in other words, you know, it might be perfectly reasonable for many of the bans to take place when it's someone being just overtly offensive and mean and just making other people feel uncomfortable, that sort of thing. But I think the more times you give in to public pressure, the more you're swayed by them. And there's nothing keeping people from Twitter or Twitch chat or what have you, Reddit, from being more reactionary, being more extreme, getting upset over things that maybe they don't need to get upset. So it's like there's no repercussions for them overreacting, in other words, but GDQ in this case, catering to these overreactions, has repercussions for people who maybe don't deserve to be banned. Do you feel like that's a problem at all?
It can be looked at from the other way around though, where like it is true that the more people ask of them to you know do something about X person for doing Y, the more you give into that, the you know the less ground you hold for saying like no, we're going to we're going not do this or we're going to handle this differently. Like sure, that can definitely make them look weaker, I guess, as an organization. But if from the other way around, like if a lot of people are saying like we don't feel comfortable with this person at this event, and they say no, we're not going to do anything about it, does that also hurt their brand that they're trying to uphold, where they are trying to be the protector? So I think it's kind of like between a rock and a hard place, where if they say nothing and if they say something, they're getting burned either way. Because it's a tough one, because I'm not really like following any of these people on Twitter who are reporting these people for allegedly like having stuff in their Twitter bio or like saying something in a private server. Um, I don't really see the primary sources for these things, so I can't really say like. And again, like if we're just dealing with like people can get offended by anything, right? It doesn't really matter how big or small it is. Like if someone's offended, like what's the criteria for deeming somebody too like uncomfortable to have an event? Like is it because a
Exactly.
few people said it? Is it because a few people didn't say it? Like where do you really draw the line?
Right. That's
Yeah,
what I'm trying to say.
but
You need to have some like standards, right? Some principles that.
but I
Okay.
think it's an impossible thing to standardize, because it's always a matter of opinion. I mean, isn't banning somebody a matter of opinion too? Like if you if you feel somebody is uncomfortable having an event, like
Yeah, but it's
is
like GDQ could have some hard and fast rules, like, just for example, don't say or don't threaten anyone, don't spread any hate that discriminates against a group of people or something. Let's just say that those are their rules. It's like, well, then
Oh, I
even
think we have to also clarify here that a lot of these bans that we're talking about aren't really bans from the whole event. They're broadcast bans. So like in my case, it was a broadcast ban, because like the idea is that somebody who used that word shouldn't be representing the event, is the idea. They're still
okay,
allowed to come to the event because they're not seen as a threat to others, but they're not allowed to broadcast on their channel, because it's to them, it's like they're letting somebody who condones hate represent them. So that was the whole thing. I don't really follow this whole GDQ stuff too much anyway. Like, cause like I said, like my speedrun community has kind of formed its own community
really,
throughout the past like 4 years. Where, well, like, I mean, all popular speedruns do, right?
in
We have
terms
our
of
own
your
friends.
stream,
We have
yeah.
like we have our own family. That kind of stuff. Like I don't really pay too much attention to like stuff that's going outside of that, especially like because GDQ, like the game never gets in. I'm not allowed to broadcast. It's like I personally don't look into too much of that stuff. But from what I saw, I believe somebody got banned for like being known for saying stuff like that, and like having stuff in his Twitter bio about stuff like that. So the idea is that they don't want somebody like that representing them on the stream, but they're still allowed to come to the event, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that, but
Do
I
you
know at least in
feel
my case, in Trihex, that was the same thing, where they're allowed to come, but they're not allowed to broadcast.
do you feel like you've moved on from GDQ in a sense in general? Like, is that something that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. I mean, I guess you could. I mean, the thing is that I'm very much like community oriented, to the point where if my community wants me to submit to the event like so badly, like they want to have the game represented, I wouldn't be opposed to doing it. But as far as like my personal desires, like to submit, it doesn't really bother me. Like I've already done the event once. There are other speedrun events. There are other great speedrun events and communities that, like I can have a chance to be a part of now that I'm not like focused on getting the game into this event a second time. It doesn't, we already had our chance to show it. Like it's not going to bring that much more exposure or interest to the game if I do it again. Maybe, I don't know, but either way, like if I genuinely don't feel welcome somewhere, I'd feel like I don't need to insert myself. As it's more of that kind of a thing. But also, I'm just kind of indifferent now.
So you obviously at some point felt very unwelcome at GDQ, obviously after the ban. But I think what a lot of speedrunners that I've talked to, it sounds to me like there's an opportunity here for a a different kind of event, or at least an alternative event. Is that something you think you would be interested in?
Yeah, the thing is, like, a lot of people like to complain about games done quick for whatever their own grievances are, but a lot of those people who complain don't actively seek out other things to do. Like they just kind of just end it there, like whatever their opinion is on GDQ, I don't like this event, blah blah. and then that's it. Like they don't seek anything else. But there are plenty of events like ESA and Pace, and I think the Calathon actually ended this year officially, but that's more of I'm not sure if it's a location change or not. I don't want to spread misinformation, but if you want to look into Calathon, you might be able to find some more information about they're switching at it, they're just ending it. I've been to events that don't even run anymore, like Smash the Record, like that Raging Cherry helped organize. That was like a Smash speed running crossover, and that was really fun too. It was a very small event, but it was fun. Like there are plenty of small events that you can go to. Um, just look around, you know. Like I'm personally this year, my plans for speed running events are I'm gonna attend Pace 2020, which is it's a speed running event, but it's not charity oriented. It's more competitive oriented. So it's like it would be like a tournament where you go and people compete in races for prizes. Like it's different. It's like a nice change of pace. And of course, there are still showcases because that's like the core of speedrunning is showcasing your game and how it's played. But the main focus is more competitive than just charity stuff. And while charity is great and all, like I think it's nice that we have like a different type of event that's not just like trying to reach a donation goal. You know, it makes it a little bit more interesting to have different kind of events that are thinking outside the box. And there are plenty of those if you just look for them.
Do
You
you
know, the problem is
foresee,
people aren't looking.
let's say these events that you're pointing out, that they continue to grow, they continue to attract, serious speedrunners like yourself. Could you foresee a sort of split or schism between the speedrunning community down the line? Say, if these events that you're mentioning get more popular amongst the competitive speedrunners, let's say, and then something like Games Done Quick is more so for charity, for entertainment. Do you think something like that could potentially happen?
This is all just Twitter stuff, but I've already seen a lot of people get into arguments over whether speedrunning can be competitive or not. Um, this might be a little bit off topic, but there are two things that I feel like there's not going to be much of a split really, but people just are going to have differing opinions and agree to disagree on this. I don't think it's worth getting into an argument over whether you think speedrunning can be competed for with prizes and stuff, because you got to remember, like I said before, how like my game's formed its kind of its own community within this larger community. Like say take for example like the SM64 community where they have like multi-thousand-dollar prize pots now for these bounties that are being held. They're very much a competitive oriented community. So like if another community says like, "Hey, you shouldn't do that. That's derailing the meaning of speedrunning and all that." Like they shouldn't care. Like they're just playing their game. They want to play it. And if you're at an event where like a competitive event where your game like you have your community of your game, you're surrounded by those people. They're not like that. That's your own community. You know, there's not going to be a lot of interconflict there. I've also noticed that with like these events that I go to, like GDQ that I've been to a couple of times. I've been to Pace. I've been to a couple of Smash tournaments, like I said, that have speedrunning incorporated into them. They're all mostly the same people like involved or active with them. So like like it's not like there's going to be too much conflict because they're all the same people. You know, it's like a lot of the speedrunning community is still grassroots, so the people who run it are effectively at most of the same events anyway. There's a lot of crossover, so I think that people just generally like are more on like the same team. But of course, there are a few outliers who like are like super like committed to like some event or like I guess like against events. Like it's mostly just GDQ I'm talking about, where people have it's more controversial, right? You have people who are like 100% supporter, die hard, they can never do any wrong, versus people who just absolutely hate it.
So it
You
sounds
know,
like GDQ is sort of splitting the speedrunning community at large, at least a little bit.
I wouldn't say splitting. I just people just disagree. You know, like some
Yeah.
people, even the people who disagree with some of the stuff they've done, they still attend the events. You know,
Okay.
like I wouldn't say it's causing so much of an issue that people are losing friends over it, like Pokemon or Smash. You know, it's not as serious as people say it is. I don't think it's just more people have complaints and
Some people
grievances.
take
But
it pretty serious, though.
some people do, but I think they're just more the exception than the rule.
Um,
Geez, my
so,
computer's going to sleep. Hold on.
oh, no worries.
That's Windows for you. All right, we're good.
On that note, though, about GDQ, I was watching, a lot of clips from it. I was watching this panel from it. I feel like mental health issues, and this isn't just GDQ. I think this could be speedrunning community in general or gaming communities in general, are very prevalent. You know, I've heard a lot of speedrunners talk about their struggles with depression, with anxiety, these kinds of things. I feel like this is an issue that maybe doesn't get addressed enough, or at least isn't addressed in the right ways. Because my theory with GDQ, for example, is that they don't really try to tell people, hey, you know, if you have a lot of anxiety or depression, these are the resources there to help you. This is the ways that you can get help. This is the, maybe even offer some advice or have some people who can offer some advice in some sense. But I more so see it as them, like you mentioned, trying to protect people, which is well intentioned, but I think that sometimes you can not enable but exacerbate issues if someone has an irrational paranoia or anxiety about something. Instead of policing what they're afraid of, you can instead make them not feel afraid of that when if they shouldn't be. You know.
Well, like when I say that they're trying to protect these people, I more so mean that it's more of their brand. Like they want to brand themselves as the protectors of people who are marginalized, and like by contradicting that, you know, it's just bad business. That was more of my point from a completely apolitical standpoint. That was my point more so.
So you think it's more business oriented with them?
I think it just like to me like it just kind of makes sense, right? Like if you're trying to build a safe space for people to, you know, if the idea, a lot of gaming is, you know, gaming in general, not to sound like, you know, like the whole gamers rise up meme, but like a lot of gaming is like people who are like kind of like outcasts, or just like you said, lonely people who struggle with, like, you know, mental health disorders and stuff. Like, I mean, I've struggled with depression in the past. I've gotten over it since, but like I feel like a lot of people who have like who are very passionate about games and isolate themselves from others for any period of time, like, can relate to stuff like that. And, you know, like that's what I guess, like, it makes the most sense for a company that's trying to build an event that's all inclusive of not just types of people but types of games, and, you know, ways people are even playing games. Like, for example, like they had a Guitar Hero showcase. My guy Frosted did a Clone Hero showcase in GDQ, and everybody loved it. But it's not speedrunning, but it's still like gaming in general. Like, I think they're trying to expand their brand to keep it all inclusive, all types of people and games. And I think that if you're trying to build yourself up to that, it only makes sense to try and make a space that's safe for those people who do want that safe space. But like you said before, in making that safe space, there's criteria that can be a little bit vague, where if somebody's offended by something, like, what do you do about it? Are you keeping that safe space if you don't do something about these people? You know, is it right? How do you decide who deserves it and who doesn't? It's just all stuff that's kind of hard to answer, honestly. And I've seen people, like, for example, like, disagree with the recent bans and agree with my ban and the other way around. Like, it's all just a matter of opinion, really. That's why it's so hard to really say who's in the right or the wrong, because you're essentially just making, you know, rules based on opinion.
Do you think that in the same way that this is another facet to the safe versus unsafe thing is, sure, you know, I agree with you that GDQ as a brand is in general trying to keep a safe space, let's just say, for speedrunners of all different types. However, I've found that there is another side to that, where people who aren't necessarily hateful or mean or anything will go to these events or will be around GDQ staff, and they'll kind of feel unsafe, or they'll feel pressure in the sense that, like, every word I say can be interpreted in this bad way, can be viewed as this offensive thing, and they feel on edge. So it ends up creating the inverse for some other people, maybe who don't deserve to feel that way as well, because they're not necessarily hateful people. Like, someone got in trouble. He kind of got a bad look from GDQ staff, or felt uncomfortable for calling a boss in a game a soy boy. And because someone on Twitter complained about it. And it's like, well, he's talking about a virtual boss. He's not being discriminatory. Really, he's just using a term that somebody
Is
found.
soy boy discriminative? I didn't even realize that was offensive.
I don't
I
think
thought it was just
so.
I thought it was just a meme.
I think it
I
is
thought,
just a meme. I think you're
yeah, like,
right. But do you
but
see what
that's the
I'm
thing.
saying?
Is like it's more of like the social forces decide if something's offensive or not. That's the essence of language, isn't it? Like if a word or term is used to describe something for long enough, it eventually becomes that definition.
Yeah.
So like that's the whole argument is like the conservative versus liberal. Like, is this still okay, or like are you just not caught up with the times? It's just a matter of opinion, I guess. That's why it's so hard to really talk about these things without being political because it's just a matter of opinion. And if you, again, if like I said, the
What is your
if
opinion?
you're on the soy boy thing,
Sure. No. On let's just say on the politicization of speech, on language, on the encroachment of language. It's like, okay, you know.
I know I understand what you're
Okay.
saying. I'm very much a one track minded person where the only thing I care about is my community, my people, my game, the betterment of those things. So let's just like because if we're talking about language, we have to acknowledge that like everything that we're saying right now, we have some kind of a goal in mind. Like that we're all speaking for one reason or another. But like what I always have in the back of my mind is like, how can I help the people in my community? How can we grow the game? How can we better these people who have honestly given me everything I've ever wanted in life to be able to stream and play this game every day? How can I give back to these people and help grow the game that I love? That's my MO. So when I think about like word choice and saying words that people can be offended by, like I'm not so attached to these things that like I don't have to use the F slur to get my point across because like all you're doing is just leaving room for someone to misinterpret what you're actually saying. Use the word asshole instead if that's what you actually mean. Like you don't have to be so attached to just words in general. Like yeah, the definitions of words change, and but if your main goal in life is to like to achieve this one thing to help grow your community and make this game better than it's ever been, do you really need to use that word to accomplish that goal? No, obviously not. So like can you just let it you can just let it go, can't you?
But where do you
You can just
draw
use
the
it
line?
to
Because it's like, okay, maybe the F word you don't need to use. But what if the word asshole or stupid, hypothetically, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's like, what if that becomes an issue? I mean, where do you draw the line?
I think the difference there is that it's not being used to describe a certain group of people.
Right.
So like
But
it's
neither
kind
is
of
soy boy, arguably. You know what I'm saying? Like, what it's
but I think
becomes.
there's a gray area there because part of the soy boy meme is that like the joke is that like you're intaking so much estrogen that you eventually become a girl.
Right.
That's the joke. But like obviously it's a different strand of estrogen that doesn't actually affect your like hormonal balances and stuff. So like it's if you understand where the meme comes from, you know it's not in bad taste because it doesn't like it does not actually describing gender changes because it's like
Yeah.
that's it doesn't even make any sense. It scientifically doesn't even make any sense. But like does it matter though? Because I think it is in that gray area where you can use it to describe like a gender change and people that's a touchy subject. So like if people get mad over using the term like I don't need to use that term to lead a community or accomplish my goals. So being as apolitical as possible, like do you really need to run that risk of being misunderstood? Is where I stand on that because like
Yeah.
I'm not totally attached to any of these words or terms. Like I don't care if they exist or not.
Hmm.
Like they're just words. I don't need to use them if they don't help me in accomplishing my goals.
Okay.
You know, that's just I mean that's obviously like a different I guess like a different a unique approach I guess to this
I
whole
see what
thing.
you're saying.
Yeah, like I think people just get too attached to words when like, the times change. People use different words to describe different things. It's unfortunate that things that were once not offensive are offensive now, but I feel like that's just something you can't really control.
Do
You know?
you I grew up in a time, and I suspect you did too, where saying the F word casually and regularly was like the norm.
I think it's regionally based too. Where are you from?
I'm from the West Coast area.
Interesting. Okay.
What
So I'm
about
from
you?
the East Coast, and I would have to like if you use the F word in like a class in like my middle school or high school, um, the teachers would never even bat an eye. They wouldn't care at all. But if you insulted somebody for being gay or made fun of gay people, you get OSS. That's just how it was.
What's
Like the
OSS?
word was
What's OSS?
out of school suspension.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like if the word was detached from the harassment. But again, like
Which is how you used it.
yeah, but like does it matter? I mean, you can say that like again, it's from both to give fairness to both sides here. Like does it like if it was out of context, does it really matter that I used it versus you're not yet to get with the time to understand that you can't use this word anymore. And I mean, I'm not trying to divide my community by using words like that and being a
Yeah.
bigot. So, like, I just don't need to use the word to describe things that don't mean what that word now means.
Let me meet you there and say like even if I fully agree with that, which I mean I think there's some nuance there, but let's just go with that.
Yeah,
That
of
you know,
course there is. Like, it's hard to dissect stuff like this. There's no
given
clear
that
answer
though,
why we're talking about it.
given that though, isn't the context of your life like you were just talking about how in school no one would bat an eye. Like it's not. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not unreasonable, even if you're a kind person, well-meaning person, for that to let's say slip because you in your upbringing it was okay and you're not using it to demean someone. It's like there's understanding on your part that people find this offensive. It doesn't have to be a word that's a part of your regular vocabulary because you don't want to marginalize people, you don't want them to feel offended. You're having understanding in that scenario, right? But people on the other side also need to have an understanding that, hey, you grew up using that word. It was okay. It was okay for millions of people. You weren't using it to demean someone, and you're trying to change for the better. That was kind of the message of your whole video is you're saying, hey, I learned from this. I'm trying to do better. I feel like there's not enough understanding from that side of things.
I think it can be from both sides though, right? Because there's the side that says you're the devil for using this word, but there's also the side that says it's just a word. You should be allowed to say whatever you want. Like there's both sides. There are two extremes. You know,
Hmm.
so I think that is true. I agree that people should be more understanding. But that's the reason why, like in my video, I not only asked for forgiveness, I also offered forgiveness. Like well, this wasn't the video actually. This was the pay spin that I made actually, where I said, if you've wronged me in the past and you want forgiveness, please reach out to me because if I'm asking for forgiveness, I'd be a hypocrite to not offer it as well. So I think there needs to be more communication between both sides, but there also has to be a willingness to communicate from both sides. I think that so much of this stuff, um, these disagreements are just a result of social media being so divisive. Where like Twitter, for example, is a very toxic platform where it's almost made in a way that encourages arguments and fighting and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff that people fight over on the internet, like when you meet them in person, it's not even an issue because like you're just people in that sense. Like you're just down to earth. You're able to talk to each other. You know, like I've never, I can't say never because I've had some disagreements with people in person, but it's not nearly as often as I've had disagreements with people online. That's just my personal account. And I'm a very, you know, um, tongue in cheek, tongue and cheek person. So yeah, people get offended by a lot of stuff that I say because I have a lot of opinions, but like in person, you can put all that aside because you're not just on the internet, like on your stream saying I don't like this game or this game sucks or this I don't like playing this category or this speed run. Like people can get offended by stuff like that. But when you're in person, you put that all aside and you just become people. Yeah.
I think we could use more forgiveness and understanding online. And my only hesitation with I totally
It's
see what you're
hard.
saying. My only hesitation with giving up ground and giving up, I say ground more like, okay, now this is new. This is offensive. We can't say this anymore. This is offensive. We can't say this anymore, which I get from one perspective, right? But I feel like without forgiveness as a part of that equation, people won't learn. They'll be driven to one extreme or the other. But forgiveness can bridge that gap and make people understand each other.
Yeah, no, that's a perfectly reasonable statement. I agree.
Well, you're an exception to that big time because it's rare that people. I think it's one thing that you came out and apologized in a sense, but you didn't just apologize. You kind of. I think you're trying to be the bigger person, and that's a little bit rare. In a lot of people after getting banned, they'll kind of be like, "Fuck GDQ," or they'll double down. I see that sometimes. And in this case, I think you tried to be the bigger person.
And
It's
I wouldn't
yeah.
necessarily say that these people who are doubling down are necessarily. I know you're not saying this, but some people might assume they're just like bad people or just like egregious or self-centered. I feel like a lot of this stuff is reactionary, and the way social media works again is that you say something online, it's permanent, and a lot of the stuff that you say is like, I just got banned from GDQ. Fuck, fuck, you know. So the first, you gotta just make. A lot of people don't think about like the first thing you say when something like this happens is going to be permanent. Like you have to think about what you say before you say it, and not enough people are thinking before they're speaking, and not enough people are realizing that a lot of people don't think before they speak.
Hmm.
Like for me personally, like this may be off topic a little bit, but I've been struggling with ADHD my entire life. I'd say things that like I get like emotional over things that I have a very tough time controlling. I've gotten better at it, but again, like it's still something I struggle with. Like I have to really like grip my hands when something shitty happens and I just want to go on Twitter and lash out. But like I've gotten better at just not doing that over just practicing it and being aware of it. So I think that people just need more awareness of themselves and awareness of others because like there are a lot of people who can make excuses about like I can make an excuse about how I say shit without thinking, but I think that we can all at least put in the better foot to become better people. It's both sides. You can't ask for people to become better and not try to become better yourself. Likewise, if you're asking for people to become better, you have to also offer them forgiveness while trying to become better yourself.
And
I think
finally,
it's also like a. Oh, I just have one more
yeah,
point.
yeah,
It's
go
like
for it.
it's also like a self-centered thing where people are at the center of their own universe and they think that everybody else around them is designed to please them or not offend them. Where like you don't realize that we're all different people. Billions of us. We're gonna say one thing that'll offend somebody or another. Like you just have to be aware that like even though like it's your world and the stuff in your world is what makes sense to you, you have to remember
Hmm.
that to other people that may not be the case, and
Yeah.
just learning along with each other.
And I think, I mean, I know it's like a commonly said point, but the difference between real life and social media is like you can have a friend or someone even you just met. You guys have a certain level of understanding who they are, where they come from, what their tone is. But with social media, it's a million different kinds of people. You don't know them. You assume the worst. You assume this. It's so easy to get offended and to be offensive at the same time because you're on different wavelengths and you're shouting to who knows how many people when you're saying anything. But as a kind of closing question, what do you envision? What do you want to see in the future from the speedrunning community at large? Maybe the community you're building. What are some goals you have, or what would you like to see going forward?
Well, in my own community, I feel that the remake for this game, regardless of whether it's a good speed run or not, is going to be a nice way to really bring more exposure to us, obviously. But another thing too is that I specifically speedrun a game that is very glitchy, broken. There's a sequence breakers skip every like 30 seconds. So having a new perspective of like a game that's not as broken or is broken in a different way to show people like or at least let people play casually for the first time and see like, okay, this is how the game is supposed to be played versus how we play the original. Like it just shows how much work and dedication has gone into the original. So that's like one thing I'm looking forward to is people playing the remake for people who didn't play it when they were a kid, play the remake and realize like how much work has gone into the original and how much we care about it. That'd be nice to see in the future. But for the speedrun community at large, um, honestly, I don't really think too much about like broad things like that. I'm really just focused mostly on my own community. And lately, I've been working a lot with the Global Speedrun Association (GSA). They're the people who run the PACE event that's more competitive oriented, but they've been um they've been one of the organizations for speedrunning that have been more accepting of our game over the course of the past like year or so, where like they're like more than happy to showcase it even for like this is more of a, I guess this is kind of a plug, but this Sunday and the next Sunday they're going to have 2 8-hour blocks where they're going to be showcasing a 100% race tournament on their channel, like just for 2 days, 2 full days. I think that's really awesome that like people are willing to give this game, like obviously I've mentioned it's more popular and it's not as obscure as it used to be, but it's still like there could still be a stigma that it's not as legitimate as we believe it is. So it's cool that like organizations like them are willing to see through the stigmas and realize that we do have a really great game here that we put a lot of time into. So I mean, shout outs to them for being so good with like thinking outside the box with speed running, and also just giving our community a chance to shine. It's nice.
Well, thanks for sharing your input on all that, Shift. Thanks for being just open and honest. And I hope for the best with your community because it sounds like you're really serious about that. And I think you're going to go far with those kinds of, with just how you approach things. I think you're going to have a lasting community for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.